recording. Okay. Welcome everybody to this illumination workshop, which is hosted for the Equine History Collective. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat, or after the theoretical part before the practical, you can ask me questions, and then after the practical part or during the practical part as well, if you have want to ask any details. So first of all, I wanted to share some images of what the medieval illumination process and results would have looked like today. And this is an image, obviously not nativity scene, but maybe some people might recognize this. This is a scene from the story of Dracula, and it has been reconstructed because the story of Dracula, as it was found in the Russian tradition, wasn't illuminated. So this is kind of invention. Why I'm showing this is just to show how the page would have been laid out. And this is made to imitate 16th century Rus style, and the text is in Cyrillic. So basically, you have this large initial, you have the scene, you have smaller initial, you have the text, and the illumination here, it was done in tempera, made with egg yolk. And this is something we're not going to do in this workshop because I wanted to keep it down to affordable materials. But people are interested, I'm going later on to post a little video in the discussion of the event, how to make egg yolk tempera. And basically the results with modern tempera, it will look very much the same, you will see. And then when you were copying a manuscript, you would have sometimes a page without text, and then you might have a page where you want to insert some text, but also an image or an initial. So basically what you do is you copy the text, then you do the initial. And we have some medieval examples where you have spaces left for the initials, or spaces left for illuminations, and the illuminations were never done, or they were only done in pencil. They have never been colored. So this was how it was commonly done. Of course, you can do it the other way around if you are doing it yourself. So now I'm going to share my screen and show some images of horses, donkeys, donkeys in the nativity scene. First of all, is that I don't assume people are medievalists here. I wanted to just explain that the greatest event, the greatest feast of the Middle Ages wasn't actually the Christmas. And in the Middle Ages, Christmas wasn't celebrated with as much pomp as we do today. It wasn't the greatest event of the year. But basically, Easter carried it all. And of course, donkeys participated in the Easter procession. We see in this image Christ on Palm Sunday entering Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. Which is here, it's remarkably realistic. We have a rope halter on the donkey. The donkey looks very intelligent. It's a big, large one. So Easter was a central feast of Christianity, and then Christmas was second to it because, well, basically Christ came to save the people, and of course he needed to come some way. That's why we have Nativity. as Nativity and we have Christmas, but it's more important the fact of the crucifixion and the resurrection. If people are interested to learn more about medieval Christmas, there is a conference, virtual conference on Christmas in late antiquity or the medieval period, a virtual one hosted by medievalist.net, and I think it was the University of Cyprus, somewhere in Greece. You can also look it up, and it's free to join. It's going to be live streamed. So basically, donkeys are quite important for Christ's life, and this is from the first days. You look at some the images. It's all this cycle around the Nativity, all these events, they get richly illuminated in various medieval sources. And today I'm going to present only European sources produced basically around France, Tournai, Belgium, and so on. So this is a bit biased. But what you would see is the Nativity, the visit of the three Magi, and the flight to Egypt, and all of these things, they would be featuring donkeys, of course, asses in the Middle Ages. And you will see that the way to present as this, it varies in terms of realism, in terms of what the animal looks like. Is it like a real donkey? Not so much, and so on. And I'm also going to share the images later on in the chat. So if you want to have a go at kind of copying one of those, and you will be able to do so. So this is a flight to Egypt from a manuscript produced in Colony. It's in Oxford Bodmer Library, MC 147, and yeah, shows Mary sitting sideways on a donkey, Joseph leading the donkey. The donkey, it seems it's again, here it's not very clear. Is it wearing a rope halter? Is it wearing some kind of bridle with a simple bit or a hinged bit? We don't really see it here. You can see it's a lowly animal. It's carrying its head very low, unlike the rather proud donkey on the previous picture when it was carrying Christ to Jerusalem. It was kind of noble animal. But it's gray, and we know that in medieval discourse in chivalric romances, the knight on the gray horse on the white horse is still preeminent. So white donkey. It also seems that it's ambling. Ambling was a pace when the horse or the donkey would lift both of its legs on the same side at once, and this would result in a smoother gait, so making it preferable for traveling. Ambling horses or amblers, they were quite expensive. If you remember Canterbury Tales and the Wife of Bath, who is experienced traveler and not and quite well off, she is riding an ambler. There was a question in the chat. Okay, Miriam would be the right person to consult about ambling. I have never actually ridden an ambling horse. And apparently those non-diagonal gaits, there are lots of variations of them. It could be taught to a horse or a donkey. It could be artificially taught. It's still taught today. Or it could be naturally inborn. There is a gene which corresponds to ambling. And in the Middle Ages, apparently, they were both breeding amblers and training them. There is a saying that a colt could be there is a saying just as a colt could be taught to amble by walking in special hoops, so a person by is also a creature of habit, something like this. But there is also another saying that if both the sire and the dam are trotters, then it's unlikely the foal would be an ambler. So people were very much aware it could be inborn, but it could also be trained. So this is, as you can guess, it's from the same manuscript. It's a different initial, so it's very, very small image. You can see the letters just cut over here. It's the same page, actually. It's also flight into Egypt, but looks a little bit different. And here the donkey is clearly not ambling, I think. But Joseph, he's still bearing his belongings. He's still leading Mary on a donkey, and she's still carrying the child. Maybe they have switched donkeys, who knows? Or we shouldn't assume that all the illuminators, they were perfectly kind of aware of all the details about equids, their behavior, their management, their equipment. We should remember that in the Middle Ages, people illuminators quite often, they were just copying the patterns. That's what we are going to do. We are copying the patterns, and sometimes they would change something. Especially if you are copying for a rich patron, or it's like the fashion changes. You're copying from an older example, but the fashion changes. So they would make some small tweaks, but it's not like they're really into it. And there are also cases when there would be instructions written just under the miniature, or kind of around it, and sometimes illuminators got them wrong. We are not going to see any examples of this, but I just want to make people aware that just the fact that they lived in the Middle Ages and they would have seen horses routinely, maybe donkeys not so routinely, doesn't mean that we should trust everything we see in the miniatures. Also, donkeys could have been more exotic in the more northern regions of Europe. There is a wonderful book introducing the medieval donkey. It's a series of books on introducing medieval animals. I have read also the introducing the medieval dragon, which was wonderful. And the book about donkeys doesn't speak so much about nativity scenes, unfortunately, but it does speak about the fact that in some regions donkeys were quite uncommon, for example, in England, whereas in Italy they were much more common. Okay, so thanks for explaining what is ambling. That's great. And going on, we have another image. It's from Queen Mary Psalter, which is in London, British Library. And that's 14th century manuscript. I have shared this on Facebook. Again, so this is the Nativity. Christ is being nourished by his mother, and there are these animals looking. So in this case, we see a donkey which looks maybe not so much as an actual donkey, but it resembles very much the donkeys which is found in other illuminations, in romances. There is one romance which has the donkey as a king, and it's illuminated. It has exactly the same head. Looks like the donkey is kind of a little bit irreverent and laughing. And this, again, it goes into the medieval discourse about donkeys. It's a humble animal, the animal of humility. Christ came to the earth not on a palfrey or a war horse, a destrier, but on a humble donkey. We all know that. Of course, medieval preachers were stressing this fact all the way through their sermons. At the same time, donkeys are associated with laziness, with all kinds of base features. So it's a kind of animal on the border. What else can we say about this image is that we have all these saints assembled around. And this leads us to the question, where actually do we find these nativity scenes? It's quite common to find them in books of hours, which are books with prayers for different occasions, for different hours of the day. That's why they're called books of hours. In psalters, like in Queen Mary's Psalter. Sometimes they could also be found in the text of the gospel, so lectionary. So lectionary is a gospel which is arranged according to the readings of the year. So not on one gospel after the other, but according to the readings of the calendar. But it's not actually that common to have image of the nativity. It's not a default option to have the image of the nativity just come in at the relevant point of the gospel. Because Christ's birth and other events of his life, they come to be projected back onto events of the Old Testament, and in particular on some of the Psalms. It is fairly common to have some Psalms with these images of the Nativity and other scenes from Christ's life. And the same for books of hours. In prayers, you would see references to events in Christ's life, and that's where you would get this illuminated initials or full page miniatures. And definitely not Christmas cards. I'm sorry to disappoint people. Don't get Christmas cards in the Middle Ages. At least not that I know of. This would be devotional art, so slightly irreverent what we are going to do, or maybe not. It just depends on how you treat the image. Yeah. So all the images I'm sharing, they are free to use for teaching or academic purposes. So if you would want to copy one of them, you don't need to ask a permission. It's only if you start a business, then you might need to check the copyright status. I think what we are doing now is educational. Oh, that's another image. You see, it's from Morgan Library, MC 141. It's another book of hours. And you see the layout of a page typically here. So you see the prayer, Deus, etc., etc. Sorry. Deus auditorium. So the prayer is written here and on the next page, and we see all these beautifully drawn borders. And here you get to see that the background, it's not a realistic background, but it's drawn as a pattern. And again, the donkey seems ambling, by the way. Again, we have this neck which is sloping down as a lowly animal. What I find interesting about this image, it's not quite clear that the Virgin is sitting sideways. I think she is riding astride, which is certainly a possibility. There was nothing against women riding astride, especially if you're riding over distance. This is much more comfortable, I guess, and it's also easier to kind of manage your horse. There is some confusion about riding side saddle sideways. In the Middle Ages, there were no side saddles as we know of them today. Women could ride sideways, which is basically it's like a chair stuck on top of the your riding animal. And we don't have any surviving medieval sideways saddles, but it has been hypothesized based on visual materials that what they would basically do, they would take an astride chair and add the back part. And I have tried sitting in reconstructed saddles for fighting, war saddles, and actually sitting sideways in them is quite secure. If you add the back part, it's really, really comfortable. The problem is that it's much harder to guide your horse. And I don't know how it how riding at speed or over distance would have been good. But definitely it's a possibility. There is no stigma attached to riding astride. So riding sideways, it's kind of gets more common towards the end of the medieval period, especially for processions, and especially for like women who are elite. Again, if we go to Canterbury Tales, we have the wife of Bath who is riding astride with spurs, and we have the prioress who is riding sideways. Kind of tells something about these two characters. What the detail which I found very interesting. If I see if I can magnify it. Oops. No, apparently I can't. Okay. The detail which I found very interesting is the fact that this donkey it's wearing. Here we can clearly see it's wearing a curb bit, so a bit which would apply pressure on the pole area and not just on the jaw, and which in theory it's much more powerful, much more severe. It's also more technologically complicated. So curb bits were used for elite horses, war horses, palfreys, amblers, not for humble beasts of burden, not for donkeys, usually. But here I guess it's my guess it's either because well, here's the donkey is a royal animal, it's bearing the king, Christ as the king. The other possibility is that the illuminator was so used to drawing curb bits. They just don't know of any other way of drawing a bit. It's the default option. For example, in the lateral Psalter, which is very well-known source, we have some animals harnessed to a cart. Clearly, they're working horses. They're still wearing curb bits, which in reality would have been very, very unlikely. But again, as I said, painters, illuminators, they're working from patterns, and yeah, that's what they could have done, just reproducing. And this is a later image. It's 16th century. It's Earth's hours of Hlangatog. The image is actually from Getty Images. And this is very realistic because we know that Christ didn't come to a palace. He was born in a humble cave in Bethlehem. So the landscape may not look like Bethlehem, actually, but it definitely depicts the idea of being humble, rural, not kingly or royal. But there is the three kings, the three magi, who are bringing him gifts. And we have these two animals, the donkey again and an ox, standing in a stable and just looking a bit grudgingly at all the commotion. And we have this contrast between this frayed structure. The straw on the roof is actually threadbare. There are some boards missing in the fence. There are these humble animals with scarcely any food to eat in the high hayrack. And the magnificently arrayed horses of the kings, which are wearing, we can see a war saddle. There is crupper with all these ornaments. Another horse, a gray horse, it has very beautiful bridle with all of these jewels. There are also two servants holding the horses, so they are servants of the kings. Kings are dressed in all the fashion of the time. It's kind of what they would have worn on the continent. There are these shoes with long pointy toes. There are spurs. And they're still bowing to the baby. Very, very quite realistic baby who's amused at the gifts. Yeah, and the star. Another interesting detail is that the hay for the donkey and the ox, it's found in a high hay rack. And it's not the only image. We see that it's quite common to keep hay this way. For one reason, it would be free of dust, so less likely that mice are going to nestle there. It's kind of for hygienic purposes. Sometimes we still do it today. Or we put hay in hay nets. The minus of it is that it strains the animals' necks. It makes them crane upwards. We know that horses and oxen, they eat from the ground. And actually, Jordanus Rufus, he recommends feeding horses, especially young horses, from the ground, which because this would make their necks more slender. However, I haven't seen a stabled horse on a miniature which would be eating from the ground. I don't say that such miniatures don't exist or didn't exist in the Middle Ages, just a big question mark how common this practice was. I think feeding from a high hay rack was kind of more common. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Okay, so Teresa Rogers assumes the artist wasn't a woman. It's quite likely the artist wasn't a woman. It's not impossible that the artist or the illuminator could have been a woman. Some of the manuscripts, especially religious manuscripts, they were produced women's nunneries and copied by religious women. So in theory, one of them could have been copied by a woman, but I don't think there have been many identifications of women illuminators or scribes. So it's not impossible, it's just we don't have evidence. Yeah, and there are a couple of people coming in. Okay, riding astride after giving birth. That's a good question because we actually don't know when the flight to Egypt occurred. It could have occurred at any point within 3 years after the birth of Christ. If we go back to the previous image, if we look at the Gospels, it says that Herod wanted to destroy all children from the age of 3 and younger. So he wasn't that stupid. I mean, like, probably soldiers could distinguish between a baby who was just born and a 3-year-old baby. So it could have occurred years after giving birth, so weeks. And with my third baby, I say I started riding astride some 10 days after giving birth. With my first one was 6 weeks or 4 weeks. So it depends. But actually, we don't know when the flight to Egypt occurred. It doesn't say it was immediately. Okay. So let's see. Let's go to the next image. So this is another manuscript from Belgium, from Tournai. Possibly it's mid 15th century. Again, this is another book of hours. And here we clearly see Mary is riding sideways on a donkey. This donkey has a very royal bearing. It's stepping high with one of its legs, so it actually looks like a blend between the destrier and the donkey. So very long neck. But this donkey very realistically is wearing a rope halter, not a bridle. Basically, you don't need a bridle as you're riding sideways and you have your both of your arms around your baby. So this is again realistic. What I think is could also see here a horse shoes. Okay, donkey shoes. And we know the donkeys were shod in the Middle Ages. We actually have found some shoes which would fit a horse and which looked like donkey shoes in medieval excavations in Riga as well. Although it's a bit far to north, too far north for donkeys, but yeah, you can show a donkey if it needs to travel over distance and over very rocky ground. Also, donkeys they are reputed to have very good hoofs. So yeah, I mean, like people in Belgium, I wonder if they had that many donkeys. In France, especially in the mountainous regions, and obviously in Italy, donkeys were very common. Belgium, maybe not so much. So it's hard to say whether the Illuminator actually saw lots of donkeys. Again, we have this wonderful border with flowers, very intricate, and it's clearly it's very lavish manuscript with lots of gold leaf applied. So very ambitious production, especially if we bear in mind the fact that these are not A4 images; they are smaller. Could be A5, something like this, or even smaller than that. Some of them are quite tiny. Okay. And that's another one. And it's again from Morgan Library, also France. It's MC 64 and also Book of Hours. I think this is very realistic in terms of the donkey eating. It's actually munched the grass. It looks very greedy. Less realistic is the fact it's got a bridle and the reins are going over the neck. And it's also got this crupper with very fine decorations, not unlike those we saw on the horses of the Three Kings. And also the bridle is decorated. And it's clearly not a cave where they are stationed. But yeah, the donkey is very greedy. It's kind of typical donkey or pony posture. And we are going to revisit this thing again. That's another miniature. It's actually these are details from the margins. I just downloaded this image and the margins separately because I wanted to get all the details. So the next two images are from the same source and from the same page. It's the marginal images, very rich. And you see here again, like two Egypt. Here Christ is a bit of a grown-up kid, so it could be 3 years old. And again, we see the greedy donkey just munching away with all the bit. People didn't really seem to bother to take off the bridle from the horse when it was eating. I just wonder how they made sure the horse didn't step in the reins. But I have seen in some illuminations of medieval Arthurian romances that also horses are eating with the bridle on and the bit on. Um, what we see here as well, and this is quite common, although for this workshop I didn't provide many images, is the pack saddle on a donkey. So if you want to learn more about medieval pack saddles, Timothy Dawson has written a chapter about them, including some images of reconstructed pack saddles, actually on a donkey. He tried one of his pack saddles on a donkey and it was published in the Horse and Pre-Modern European Culture volume. So you could also ride on a pack saddle if you have good padding. It's mostly wood and it's kind of planks to which you would tie things. But yeah, you could put some soft padding or a blanket or a mattress on top of it. Looks like they have put something on their pack saddle as well. So I hope Mary wasn't too uncomfortable. And this is also quite realistic because, yes, as a humble animal, the donkey would have been ridden in a pack saddle rather than in some more expensive one. It's much more realistic than seeing a curb bit on a lavish crapper on a donkey. That's the last of these images. We just see part of the donkey in the top and bottom register. So again, Joseph leading Mary, and the soldiers are those who are going to execute Christ. In the previous picture, this was the soldiers marching. This one as well. So again, this donkey here, it's wearing a crapper, although I wasn't able to find a better resolution image, and I'm not sure if that provides this level of detail. If it's a crapper just to hold the saddle to prevent it from sliding, which is quite a good idea, if the saddle might slide forward, or if it's a decorated crapper, which is a practical but also a status symbol. Now, I'm sorry, I find this image. It's part of a fresco, and quite stupidly, I have downloaded just the part of it. I couldn't find the whole one. I tried googling it up as an image, and it was really singularly unhelpful, I would say. What I found very endearing about this miniature is the way it shows contact between the animals and Christ. And this is both realistic, it's also symbolic, because that Christ came here for everybody to be kind to animals as well. And of course to save humans first and animals second. But basically to make the life of all creation better. And we have references to animals in the religious text. We know about many saints who are kind to animals, who are befriending animals. Of course, St. Francis of Assisi is the best known example, but he's just one of them. And basically from the first centuries of Christianity, we have saints who are taking care of animals, including horses, donkeys, and oxen. Some of them are actually patron saints of animals. Depending on the culture, whether you are talking about Byzantine saints, Catholic, European ones, there are local ones as well. So this is kind of both realistic and symbolic. So this is the image which we are going to copy today. And just before we do this, yes. Yeah, so actually, the Gospels are not kind of truth in the last instance. They're not literal truths, and we kind of shouldn't look at discrepancies. The Gospels also have different narratives, and it's a question about how familiar the illuminators were with the Gospel text. As I said, if these illuminations occur as part of books of hours, then they are standing away from the text. And although people in the Middle Ages would have known the text of the Gospels quite well, and in particular the text of Christ's genealogy and the birth, they would have been read either during the Christmas service or late or during the subsequent days. They would have been read in Latin. We should assume that all the illuminators were kind of very, very familiar with Latin, especially in this kind of later, for example, later miniatures. Well, earlier miniatures, for example, those of Coligny could have been produced most likely in religious houses. Those later illuminations, they were produced in professional workshops, so not by monks, not by people who had any reason to be particularly religious. It's kind of their job. It's their general culture, but they're not monks. So this is already professional mass productions. This one's probably not mass produced, but it's something which would have been ordered by a patron. But in this one might have been kind of more common. But yeah, some of them were clearly mass produced books of hours. And they would be working from patterns. They wouldn't be like thinking too much into it and comparing what they're drawing to what the Gospels would have said. So we should read too much into these images. But yes, we don't know where the mug, where the kings would have visited Mary and whether it was just after birth or not. Actually, if you see about Christ sitting in this miniature, it's highly unlikely that a newborn child would be sitting on its own. So okay, so don't think it should be 100% realism. Children usually would start to sit at the age of 6 months and later. And in the Middle Ages, children would have been swaddled in swaddling clothes quite often until the age of 12 months. So they would develop enough muscle to sit at the age of 6 months. That's just off topic, not related to donkeys or nativity. So I'll stop sharing now. And do people have any questions about these miniatures? Something which I haven't answered. Okay, I'll let you think about questions. You can either unmute or pose the question in the chat, whichever way you want to do it. And okay, if not, we can go on to the elimination part. As I said, I'm going to make it really, really easy for people who are not illuminators and who are maybe not so arty. Basically, I'll see if I can Uh-huh. How can I upload things? Maybe. Uh, all right. I not sure if I can upload things here. Okay. But I can put them in the Facebook group. And share them this way. Think Zoom has changed something in its settings again, so I don't really see how I can do it. But basically you can print out any of these images and do the fun part yourself. I have printed out two. This would be very complicated to draw, so I would stop with this one. If you are really think that you're kind of artistically challenged, or if you are doing it with a child, so what you can basically do, print out the image, do it in black and white. You take a soft pencil and you color the reverse with the pencil very densely. You need to color everything in. And then you do it as you would do it with the copied paper. You would just kind of draw on top of it the outline with either a dry pen or a very sharp pencil or a knitting needle or a goose quill if you have geese. Yeah, whatever, something which is sharp but which isn't going to actually cut through the paper. So yes, the better you do this part, the easier will be the rest of it. So if we are doing a Christmas card, I kind of opted for half of A4, but you can do it in any format. You can do it smaller or larger, whatever format you want. And what you do next, you put the image over your paper. Yeah, you can fold it in advance. I haven't done this. So let's see. Do I have a dry pen? Okay, so I'm going to use a knitted needle. Or you can use a pen. And just make the outline. So first of all, the outline of this image. And if you feel really inspired, you can later on add these marginal foliage images or spruce images, whatever you want to do. Like in medieval sources, you would usually get some floral illumination on the border or some animals or fruits or butterflies and other insects, but you can have a modern variation, add some spruce leaves. Then you draw the outline of all these things you see in the miniatures of the wall. Actually interesting, it's a brick wall or something, stone wall. So not a very humble place, I would say. And of course the animals themselves. Yeah, so if you are going to run an event for kids or for I know, just for general public, it works quite well because you don't need to be a very good at art to do that. Don't need to be an artist. What you will get would be an outline hopefully, yeah. Which you then would color in. And yeah, you can do it with any images. Okay, so the eyes. Of course, if you want to modify any details, you are free to do so as well. It's kind of this donkey. It doesn't look very gentle or very friendly, but we need to remember that these are very, very tiny images. So when we download them and kind of magnify and zoom in, we think, oh, they're not so good at drawing. But I have actually tried copying one of the images with a unicorn from a medieval Rus Psalter. The image was on the margins. I did it on the half of A4 on A5, and it was much bigger than the original, and I still thought that it wasn't as good as the original. So basically, well, some of these images are not very skillful, obviously, but some of them are very, very impressive. And even face expressions there. Despite the fact that these are tiny images and sometimes they don't have all this best materials, it's still very impressive how they get there. Okay. You shouldn't think that they're huge. Okay. So, right. And the hello, it's in gold leaf. So sometimes nowadays you can get a gold leaf watercolor if you don't want to invest in actual gold leaf, which is quite costly, and put the gold leaf. Okay, it's not rocket science, but it requires some investment. But you can do it in gold watercolor, and the results would be also very pretty. Okay. All right. Let's see what I've got. I don't know if you can see or not. Yeah, but there is this very fine outline of everything. Just look at the chat. There are some comments. Yes. Yes, St. Aidan giving his horse a gift from King Oswald to a beggar. Yeah, one of the versions which I have read is that it stressed that the king gave him a horse with a war saddle. It's a Middle English version. And then St. Aidan gave everything, the horse and the saddle, to a beggar. I'm just wondering what St. Aidan would have done with the war horse which had a war saddle, and what the beggar did with it. So this is kind of off-topic questions. I have blogged about this episode somewhere, and in the Russian Orthodox Church, there are two medieval saints, St. Florence and Lavre, who are credited with helping to find runaway horses. Every time my horses run away, I'm praying to these saints. They're actually very helpful. Okay. So yeah, it's good to have these saints on your list of divine helpers. They're also supposed to be patron saints of vets. Although they are Greek saints, and in Greece, in Byzantium, they are not mentioned as particularly horsey. Also quite kind of interesting. But if you want to look more about horses and saints, you can look at Saints and Sinners volume edited by Miriam Bibi. There is a second part of it coming sometime next year, I guess. Okay, so now it's time to do coloring. I said you can use watercolor, and here I'm going to use tempera colors. Watercolor is just as good. So you can mix. Just in the interest of time, I'm not going to do a lot of mixing, but we can try and see if we can mix something up, which would look like the Hello Christ and just come on. You will obviously need some brushes and some water too if you're going to illuminate with me. The other option, if you don't want to make a mess with watercolors or tempera, nowadays you can buy on the market what they call watercolor pencils. Just like normal pencils, you color in, but then you put water on top of it and with a brush, and then it would wash like and look like watercolor. Actually, it's actually, again, if you're running a workshop for kids, this is quite a good solution because they will not get that messy. And let's see what messages are there. Yeah, so acrylic gold silver bronze paint, that works quite well. Yes. I was going to bring watercolor gold, but I think the kids used it up. Or at least they put it somewhere where I couldn't find it. So let's see. Maybe I could, I know how do I share this image so it's would be on screen together. This nativity detail. How do I share it? Maybe technology driving me mad. You can theoretically could be able to view both my screen and the video. I'm not sure if I should do it from my side. Okay, so basically we could put yellow on the hello and gold, and then brownish stuff on the ox and around the donkey. And yeah, it should be simple. Okay, I'll stop sharing again. So let's see. You can add some water to the temper. Just if you think it's too dense. Yes, and a fun part if you're working with kind of traditional tempera pigments, then you would need egg yolk, but you would also, if you want the pigments to be usable for longer time, you can add some white wine, just a little bit, and then put them in watertight containers. So in the Middle Ages, I would imagine this would have been some earthenware ceramic jars. But yes, and I was wondering what the illuminators doing with the rest of the wine, because you just need a tiny amount. I've been joking that maybe they were drinking. And if you are looking at medieval illuminations, some of them look like the illuminator was really drinking a lot. Not the nativity scenes. Probably people had to behave there when they were doing nativity. Okay, what I didn't draw on my picture. I think I didn't draw the part where you have Mary's garment, which was going some some something like this. And yeah, if you think that you are good at drawing, if you know that you are good at drawing, not think about, but no, you don't need to do this copying part. I think it's easier if you are doing it for the first time since school, where you had arts lessons, and yeah, and this also if you are doing this like those bigger images with lots of details, it's also quite helpful. Yeah, I'm not sure that they did that much drinking because you still have to fast. And on Christmas Eve, um, I need some tissue. On Christmas Eve, you're supposed to fast until the service is over, and you break your fast either after the service. It could be quite long. If you're in a monastery, it could last until 4 a.m. in the morning. Um, or you do it the next day. Um, although people find it surprising, actually requirements for fasting don't require abstaining from alcohol. Just use it in moderation, as in any other times. Um, so perhaps drinking was something that which they did actually. Um, so yes, the yellow would be for gold. And if I find my gold watercolor, I'll put some of it later on over the yellow part. Um, kids, kids are like this. Um, and by the way, one of the arguments why Christmas was less important than Easter um, was if you look at the requirements for Lent and for Advent, Lent was and is much stricter. Um, for example, in the Orthodox Church, Advent is 6 weeks. It's not 4 weeks actually. It's 6 weeks. But Lent, if you count the first week, the pancake week, when you start, when you give up on meat, and the last week, which is Passion Week, it's 8 weeks altogether. And also during Advent, you could eat fish most of the time, most of the days. Okay, not most of the days, but approximately half of the days. And during Lent, again in the Orthodox Church, you depending on the part of the world you were in, but most probably you couldn't. Depends on the part of the world, depends on your particular family circle, if you're in a monastery, if you're very devout or not. But chances are you couldn't eat fish. So this was very, very kind of austere time for Lent, less austere for Christmas somewhat, but it's still fasting. So it's kind of not so much fun when I see those Advent calendars and I'm trying to explain to my kids, okay, so Advent chocolates are for kids who actually fast, who don't eat meat and cheese and don't drink milk all the Advent, and then they would receive their daily chocolate. They go, ooh, that's hard. Yeah. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. Okay. Um, so I don't know if people want to share their illuminations or not, or just want to see me drawing, but at the end of the workshop, you will be very welcome to share something you want to. And right now, you are welcome to ask any questions you have, or share your favorite Christmas images, Christmas pastimes. Um, so this is illumination workshop and not calligraphy workshop, but at the end I'll ask Edgar to come and write Merry Christmas for me on the card. And the idea is that if people want, we can have at some later point a calligraphy workshop and make a horse charm, which would hopefully keep your horse safe during competitions and other events. But there is no guarantee. I'm not going to give guarantees on charms. We can have a kind of workshop, seminar talking about these charms and how they would have worked. Some of them would have worked in a way, and why, and why they wouldn't work sometimes. Um, yeah, if people want to. I mean, I have never done anything of this sort, but I know some people who have put woolen how do you call it? Kind of pieces of woolen thread into the horse's tail, and you need to have red wool, and this is supposed to help your horse against the kind of evil eye and against misfortune. Um, so believe it or not, um, I don't know if it really helps. Yeah, kind of. I know people who have done it. One of them was actually a student who is studying vet for a vet, and she was she was very, how do I say, skeptical about things like homeopathy. And they're like, homeopathy doesn't work. And then one day I saw her weave this red cotton thread into her horse's tail, saying, oh, he's having too many injuries. I'm going to try this out. And I found it really, really funny because, yeah, she would believe in homeopathy, but she would believe in this red thread. You are supposed to weave it somewhere where it would be seen. So at the dock of the tail or somewhere. Like, and then it would work. Protect your horse against the evil eye. I don't know if it works or not. But most of these things, they work, they have placebo effect. And I've been taught again by a vet, that placebo works on animals. So if you really believe it, it will help. Don't believe it. Probably it won't. Okay, so there were votes for having the calligraphy workshop. I need to ask Edgar. He's better at calligraphy than I am. He started the passion in our family. I do only, I kind of specialize in Cyrillic calligraphy. Edgar does Gothic more than I do. But it's fun. Okay, now we need to color in the donkey, the ferocious donkey. Okay. Um, and okay, now I have my cat coming. I hope he's not going to. You see him? Uh, Interested in the illumination too, I think. Um, yeah, so I would say that many of medieval illuminators are not likely to have been working from nature and kind of even when they depict horses, sometimes they're not very good. And chances are some of them may not have never seen donkeys. Also, donkeys are not as exotic as, for example, elephants or crocodiles or whatever you get in medieval bestiaries. If you are living somewhere up north, chances are that you don't have a donkey model. So let's say they are not really good at it. Some of them are not very good depicting horses either. Um, so we can glimpse some details about medieval animal care and equipment, but we should kind of sometimes people just read into images too much, and uh, this is a little bit unrealistic, I guess. Okay, so now we need the blue ox's for the ox's horns and Mary's robe. Oh wow, that's very blue. Try to make it a little bit more subdued. Um, what you should remember about medieval colors is that they were, on the one hand, very colorful. On the other hand, some of them do change with time. And I have seen illuminations with pink horses. And surely we all know that pink horses only exist in cartoons. I don't think people in the Middle Ages were that stupid and didn't know there aren't any pink horses. So question is what the original color of these horses would have been. And I think it would have been something brown. Uh, but yeah, we don't know. It's a bit too blue, I guess. Okay, never mind. Like blue horns for this ox. It could have been done for contrast um, as well. For brightness. Or again, the artist was kind of trying to get across the idea that it was gray, but royal gray, you get a little bit too much of gray. You have gray donkey, you have gray stone wall. If you had also gray horns or brown horns, they're kind of a little bit boring. So we don't need to think they would have thought the horns were really gray. Uh, uh, blue, sorry. Okay. So I'm just doing the background kind of part, and I'll let the fine details later on. You still have this red thing at the background, which I'm not sure what it is. Could have been Stonewall. Ah, okay, wow. What a comment about Christmas altars. Uh-huh. Yeah, so made in Peru during Spanish viceroyalty. And the donkeys next to llamas and alpacas with a bucolic background. So maybe you could share, if you have any images, you could share them on Facebook, but later on. It would be lovely to see. But yeah, so basically people would have used their landscapes and their local fauna um, for creating those images and and for icons as well in the Orthodox Church. I have seen some really black Christ and some Japanese Christs as well. Um, because well, arguably because Christ came to all people and they should depict them um, these things in a way that would be kind of close and understandable for all the people. So this makes sense. It's not like, oh, they're so stupid. They don't know, didn't know there were no llamas in Jerusalem. The idea is different. Also, my kind of first degree was in English philology, which is the English language literature translation studies. And I was taught that one of the translations of our father for some people, I think it might have been Inuit language or somewhere in this part of the world. Instead of give us this day our daily bread, they wrote, give us this day our daily fish. Um, Sounds funny, but it makes so much more sense because for them, bread is not something daily. Don't eat bread on a daily basis. Why would you want bread on a daily basis? Why would you want to ask the Almighty for bread? You don't eat every day, but fish is all important. So, and this is very true of medieval images of the Nativity. You don't need to reproduce the real of Jerusalem or the Holy Land. You need to make them understandable for people here and now, and something to which they can relate. So having llamas, having animals and equipment which isn't that of first century ID is perfectly okay. You want it to be relevant, and yes, it's kind of timeless event. It happens every year. It happens anew. You celebrate it anew, so it doesn't matter if you change it a little bit and modernize. Um, yeah, I would love to see images from other countries showing other local animals. Maybe some zebras even, who knows? Be lovely to see Christ in a zebra. And this is not Christmas, this is about Easter processions. But in medieval early modern Rus, they had this tradition of Easter processions with a kind of donkey. I think there was something like this in Europe too. But they were a bit short of donkeys in Rus. It's hard to keep a donkey there in some of the areas. So basically, they would use a horse and they would make a horse look like pretend to be a donkey. And some of the icons, they clearly have an animal which steps like a horse, moves like a horse, but has long ears and donkey's tail. So I'm wondering if it's because the iconographers didn't know what a donkey is moving like, or is it because they were inspired by those processions where there would have been horses, which were just a little bit like dressed as donkeys? This is a question. Not going to answer it today. Okay. So I'm going to take a bit of time and look at the messages. Uh, oh, wow. A pit pony instead of a donkey. Thank you for sharing this, Miriam. Yeah, so that's again something you would see done locally. I don't think we should be too strict about this. It's people would do these things, and okay, now we are going for Christ. I'll try to. Um, I have actually a baby who is just the right age, under 3, the right age to travel to Egypt on a donkey. Я крашу. Okay. A bit of brown, maybe. Okay. So going for the baby and then adding the details when all gets dry. So yes, and speaking of Christmas in the Middle Ages, if you look at medieval romances and other texts, you will see that actually very few events happening at Christmas time, which could indicate that Christmas wasn't as big as it is today. For example, in the Grail romances, we have the departure of the Round Table at Pentecost. So Pentecost is the great feast when the Holy Spirit descended on the apostles. And obviously it's important. It's a big time. So the other big time would be, of course, Easter. And if you look at some of the chronicles, there are also some war campaigns happening during Lent or just before Easter. So it's not a good time to start a war. Obviously, God is not going to look kindly on this, but um, yeah, it happens. Might be happening around Easter also because it's a good time for campaigning. It's springtime. I need a different brush. I think I cannot do it with the big one. And Easter is the only medieval romance which references Easter is Sir Gawain and Green Knight, which where the events unfurl around the time of Easter. Okay, so to add these teeny tiny details, I'm using thin brush. You can also, you're doing calligraphy, you have calligraphic pen. You can do this with a really thin calligraphic pen. Which is what I often do, but should remember that everything should be dry by that time. So yeah, probably the option of white wine gets very attractive at this point. And I am sure that some medieval illuminators and scribes would have been tempted by this free supply of wine which you need for work, especially around Christmas time. And yeah, I like this detail that it's got this forelock, nice one on the ox. What I find very interesting is that I don't know about donkeys, but horses and cows, they usually don't get that well on together. Um, well, cows have horns, horses don't. And most of the horses I knew were kind of very worried about bovines. Maybe in the Middle Ages when these animals would have lived together. You know, if people have any experience of cows and horses being friends, but most of the horses I have ridden, they would be very freaked if they saw some free goats, free cows, and even goats. I have 2 goats at the moment, but when I first brought our first goat in, all the horses were really scared of her. And it's possibly because of the horns. And when I introduce new horses, they usually are scared of the goats. And then ponies realize that they can chase the goats and that's it. But the funny thing is, the bigger horses are still intimidated by the horns quite often. So I'm just wondering about horned animals interacting in this close proximity. Although in medieval households it would have been different. Just have to have all these animals living together. So any comments? Keeping together horses, oxen, goats. I have a feeling that just horses have this natural, being naturally worry about animals which have horns. But donkeys might have very different temperament. Again, it's Latvia is still not a country with lots of donkeys, so I don't have that much contact with donkeys. If people know about it, let me know. They're kind of getting increasingly more popular, but it's still not a donkey country. It's something to do with the climate. It's a bit too wet for donkeys. Um, so you only get them in zoos. But yeah, actually, when I got mini Shetlander ponies, they figured out that goats cannot do anything to them, and they started chasing them for fun. So it's quite possible that medieval donkeys and horses were much braver than our modern sport horses. Who are more nervous and everything. Okay, so we get to this touching detail of Christ trying to grab the donkey. If any people have kids, I'm sure you know the kind of baby trying to go and stick their grubby little fingers into the horse's nose. They have this oops moment. And horses are usually very good. At least they've never tried to bite the baby or eat it. But yeah, it's kind of gets really scared at this point. Scary at this point. And again, I think this particular miniature, or it's very realistic because that's the way babies behave. And also this equids, other animals, they could be quite curious about babies, especially if they haven't seen them a lot. What I also found very interesting about horses that they actually don't understand that babies are babies, they're kids, and they do stupid things. So I had like quite a few horses. Some of them were very temperamental, but they never purposefully harmed the kids, even when the kids were doing like really, really stupid things. Um, so even stallions, they kind of have this awareness that okay, babies are babies, just little foals, a bit stupid. Just bear with them, okay? So I'm just going to put some finishing touches and wrap this up because we are nearing 2 hours, which is a bit longer than I was planning. And I still have my own hungry horses to feed. They're kind of monsters. And the ghosts. Which are a little bit like pests. They are living together with the horses. They are living out. So thinking about the Nativity, Christ, and all those sheep out there in the field. And the fact that Christmas may not have been in the Nativity may not have happened in winter at all. Might have been a spring festival or summer festival. We don't know exactly. So shouldn't take things for granted either. And I'm also thinking that people in the Middle Ages, they wouldn't have thought this literally about these events. And and the fact that something doesn't look exactly like it was in Jerusalem. Many people would have traveled to Jerusalem, like Marjorie Kemp, who was a medieval self-proclaimed mystic. She traveled to Jerusalem. Women did it as well. So people who were rich or devout or both, they could travel. So they could have witnessed firsthand what the landscapes look like, and donkeys as well, but I don't think it would have changed the experience. Think, okay, so this particular miniature didn't look like the cave I saw, but still. All right. So now it's time for me to finish this up. Any details could be added later. And Edgar! And hopefully Edgar is going to come and write Merry Christmas, the medieval script for us. You can write Merry Christmas for us.
Where?
Under the miniature. Somewhere.
Cat.
Yeah, we've got a cat. That's a very medieval accessory as well, because we know that cats were common in medieval libraries, scriptoria, any places where there are lots of
Mice.
yeah, tasty vellum and mice. Thank you for coming, Teresa. We will be finished in a moment anyway. Okay, so this one has.
Okay.
Right, you can take one from that box over there.
Can you?
Yeah. Oops. I think I'm going straight over. Okay, so we are looking for a pen.
Here.
Basically, if you want to do some calligraphy, you can either buy something like a felt pen.
But it has to be a specific kind of a felt pen. If we are talking about medieval calligraphy, you see, it's flat like this. It's the nearest approximation to an actual dip pen that you can get.
It has the advantage if you are traveling with it, it's not going to spill ink all over the place.
Yeah.
Also, if you are doing a workshop for like with children around, it's safer.
Much safer than ink, that's for sure.
But ink washes away. Don't worry if you spill some on your t-shirt, it washes. Edgar is writing in Gothic script, and we've seen some illuminations from 13th, 14th century. They would all have text in Gothic script. Yeah, from the 12th to up to the 15th century. You would see Gothic script used in Europe. And then you would also get cursive from the 15th century on. And what we didn't do, we didn't line the paper at first in advance, but you can you should line it first using either dry pen or a goose quill or yes, a needle. And that's what they also did in the Middle Ages. Sometimes they would kind of line several pages by pricking, not line them, but prick them like a sheaf of pages, and then make lines on each of them. So they would have exactly the same layout.
Move it a little bit.
Yeah. Wait a second. Yes, and if you are doing calligraphy and you use actual ink, you need to have
Some blotting paper, because otherwise,
you're creating blots.
yes.
That's what blotting paper is for.
Creating them now. Lord, I want to practice.
Yeah, sorry, it's late here, and yeah. So Merry Christmas, people, and hope your horses, donkeys, and other pets are safe. And thank you very much for coming to this workshop. And yeah, if people did any illuminations themselves, you can kind of share them or upload them on Facebook. You should, or anything that comes to your mind regarding nativity, Christmas scenes, those things we talked about today. So thank you and goodbye. And I'll stop recording. Yeah.